All right, we're good to go.
All right. Welcome everyone to the 9th session of our principal seminar. This one is on continuance. Before going further, I'll also talk briefly about the plan. So today we're going to have a continuous and resourcefulness, and then at the end of it, we'll also have 20 minutes while we collectively sort of work to flesh out our wall of shame. And the idea with that is sort of, right now we have done this amazing brainstorming and so on, but we want to have it a bit more detailed and sort of so understandable and clear, and then we can use this for voting in Prague. But I'll talk more about that the last 20 minutes. And then tomorrow we have Liberty and sort of final wrap up and reflection and so on. And then we're going to have an anonymous chat. And the idea is that everyone is the status, they can participate, they can either use sort of the anonymous user or generate like a new user and just talk anything related to principles. Yeah, so that's it. And then
so Corey's got that bot set up that we can stream the HackMD notes and the Moot chat simultaneously.
Awesome.
So
yeah. And then we'll also vote on this wall of shame in terms of importance in Prague, as that will inform sort of what we spend our time on. So we'll do this later. I guess I can go through for the format. So we have this sort of wall of shame. That's here, it's document, and then we have sort of these sort of sections, and we want to make them sort of more detailed. So the idea is essentially that for the people who want to, they can sort of stay after the call or stay at the end, and then sort of just help fill this out and ask questions and make sure that they're sort of proper. And then we'll sort of swap. All right, so let's get into continuance. So we create software incentivized to continue to exist and improve without the stewardship of a single entity or any of the current team members. So yeah, let's start with the wall of shame generation like we did yesterday.
So I'll start with that. So we're the sole entity implementing status and there's no alternative implementation.
Cool. Barry?
Sorry. I was actually thinking something similar, so I'll just plus one to
that. All right. Actually?
Yeah, I think, again, less of a wall of shame, but more for just Status Studio going forward, especially for things like updating and creating new content on Studio. I think the design that we want there is to have the community contributors sort of create to it and create the right incentives and things like that, so that the core team of let's say Status Studio is not needed to continue to upgrade and maintain that.
Would it be fair to say that right now there's no sort of specific plan for that?
Say that again?
Like right now there's no specific structure for how to do that, so that would be sort of the point of improvement.
There are a couple of ideas and plans, but they haven't been executed on. So there are definitely a couple of ideas on how to do that.
Cool.
You just need to pick one and execute it, that's all.
Gotcha. Chad? Chad? All right, Graham?
Yeah, I mean, with regards to continuous, I think what strikes me is that there is no kind of incentive mechanic to host status network nodes to keep that going.
JB?
I think kind of our reliance on core contributors right now, or lack of, other contributors.
Other contributors.
Yep.
Cool. Kim?
Yeah, I agree with Akshay's point. I think like from an incubate perspective, it would be nice to be able to have a little bit more two-way dialogue. We don't have that resource right now. And I think we desperately need that to try and find projects in the ecosystem. So it's very much a one-way outreach on our part. There's no two-way dialogue. And I think it's much the same from marketing in general, is that as we move towards this like open source design, we'll also want to mirror that with more of an open source marketing approach. And for that, we'll need some kind of something to facilitate the two-way conversation, which we don't have right now.
Okay. So that's great. That's like 2 points kind of as well. Awesome. Lilo, oh, disappeared. Status IM. Not sure what that is.
That's Steph and Andy and Barbara all hanging out together in beautiful Lisbon.
Awesome.
Apparently, they say that it's loud there in the cafe. They don't feel like they can talk. Can you guys just type into the document? That would be cool.
Yeah, for people, I see lots of people typing in chat. Please just type directly in the HackMD. It's much easier. Carrie?
Yes, I think, I don't know if this is a wall of shame item or maybe just a question or a thinking out loud, but I feel that when we hire people, it's very much like in this kind of like old employee model. And I think that maybe doesn't lead itself well to like then imagining yourself, like working yourself out of the system or making your role and your input such that there can be continuance and it could carry on without you. I think that's a very like long-term goal, but just like something that we're maybe not like skewing towards now or thinking about is like having those succession plans so that we're not reliant on single people.
Yeah.
Lalo's
Cool.
back.
Lalo?
Good morning, guys. Sorry, I just joined and I don't know what the question is. So if you can repeat it or...
We're working on the wall
so
of
the question
shame
is
continuous. So what item do you have that you think that we're should be ashamed about in terms of the continuance principle?
I'm sorry, you cut off. Can you repeat it for me? I don't have a good...
Yeah. So we're talking about continuance today, and we're doing the wall of shame. So do you have a point for that we should be ashamed about for continuance?
Well, probably that we're still getting the metrics for the contributions. The compensations for the contributors that want to be part of the advocacy program.
Sorry, could you repeat that? What do you mean?
That we're still developing the metrics for the compensations for the ambassadors that want to participate in the advocacy program for status.
Okay. Cool. I guess Chad? If you back. All right.
Chad says he can't unmute, I guess.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Yeah. Type here. Perfect. I guess I agree with a bunch of these points. I think one big problem is we don't have we lack a rigorous alternative to P&L, like profit and loss. There's sort of no break-even point. We don't have a structure for further funding or continuance that isn't based on one big one-time status multi-sig kind of thing. Yeah, I think those are the two main ones that haven't been mentioned from my point of view. Cool. Anyone else before we... Right? Cool. Yeah, and you can definitely sort of add stuff here while the call is going on. So just sort of very briefly, I mentioned this right now, but like we a few starting points. Like we don't actually have traditional profit and loss, unlike a normal business. If status is successful, we create sort of a lot of value for people, but it's not clear exactly to what extent that value is captured or to what it means to capture value and so on. And the fact that we had sort of this successful ICO, sort of, I think it skews our intuition a bit because it's this sort of naive one-time event where we put out a white paper and then a bunch of money came in, but it's not clear exactly if it was more granular or if there was sort of a tap mechanism. So maybe the sort of community gave us small amounts of funds every month based on us delivering something. I think we would see a very different picture. This idea of sort of S&T status and S&T being this utility token and kind of like a token of belief. And if the value is sort of in the network, maybe it makes more sense to think of it like as maybe like a GDP of a country or something like that. I just want to show this one example. This is an illustration. Barry made this for ENS in terms of sort of measuring utility. And this is sort of one model, but ideas, and you can look at it later, but ideas that you can sort of draw sort of ways potentially of measuring the value of a crypto asset, and then you can sort of play around with assumptions and then maybe come out with something reasonable at the end. So that would be one example if we can get this more rigorous in terms of having an alternative to PL now. Just some questions to sort of see the conversation. So do people here believe in S&T and why or why not? To what extent do we rely on altruism versus sort of more proper market mechanics? And this also touches on ideas around public goods, like funding of public goods. And this is sort of radical markets and dominant assurance contracts and so on. What's a good alternative to it? And what sort of, how can we make it crystal clear in terms of what it means to be break even or be around profitable? And also at what scale do we want to do it? Do we do that status as a whole, or is this sort of in terms of specific business units within status and so on? So that's it for me. With that, I'll leave over to Michael. Thank you. Mike.
He's on mute. Maybe he's trying to talk, but is muted.
Ah, okay. Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, I was just chatting away, loving the sound of my own voice as usual. Two issues. I'd like to start with belief in S&T on two sides. It's not really clear for me how the network perpetuates itself is one side. And then the second side is actually to do with funding. A lot of our tokens aren't even released yet. So to what degree are we going to be drawing on our own token reserves to further perpetuate the network as it becomes actually feasible?
One way of looking at this is that if status is sort of very successful and we have millions of users and there's sort of some kind of economy there, that if there's a small subset of group, let's say people want to use Kudos, right? You can imagine have some kind of Kickstarter for raising funds for that. And it would be something that everyone who's interested in having Kudos functionality would sort of be able to chip in. And maybe there would even be a mechanism in terms of profiting from it as well. But that's sort of the public goods funding problem.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about it in terms of, I mean, we have a release schedule for tokens, right? And we've only released a certain amount of them to the market or sold them into the market with the ICO. There's additional tokens that can be sold into the market, or do I understand that improperly?
Oh, you talk about reserves and to what extent they might be distributed or.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a large amount of tokens which status still holds. We didn't sell all of the status tokens. We only sold a portion of them. to the market. So isn't that a possibility for additional funding in the future as the network scales up and as the token has more value and this whole economy takes off? Or do I understand that falsely?
Sure. No, I think a large portion of the funds are earmarked for sort of user acquisition. But it's a good question and maybe something we should bring up with finance and founders and so on. I still think that even if you use that, you're just punting the problem, right? Because you're just saying, well, there's more money. We have a big purse of money, and there's actually more money in this purse, but it doesn't actually solve the sort of self-sustainability problem, I think.
Well, isn't that the whole point of the token? Is that it becomes self-sustainable?
Yeah, the token itself, but not the funds for the status multisig.
Okay, but is there any reason why there can't be a status multi-sig for our tokens that we hold?
I think those tokens are in a multi-sig. I mean, I'm not on it, but I think like that's the original status multi-sig.
Right. So I mean, we don't actually even have any of the founders in the chat today, so we can't really answer that question. And that's shame on the level of Game of Thrones shame. I have to say. Oscar,
from what I remember, there is a part of these tokens that are not owned by a multisig. They are not yet claimed. They are kind of locked, so we cannot move them before it reaches a timeline.
Right. So there's a vesting schedule for the tokens, right?
Yeah. What we have access now is the amount of value raised in the ICO. So this is available now, but in future, then this other part will be available. But it's not yet defined if it's going to be used. So maybe we're never going to use it. So it's still up to our decision.
And so I guess that would be a vote that goes out to token holders as well as everybody. I mean, and how is that set up? Crickets.
Yeah, probably.
So probably, yeah, I'd consider that pretty shameful. We don't have a clue. And that's pretty much, part and parcel of the profit and loss issue. Yeah.
Well, I think you need to first establish what type of an organization status is. And I know we say it's going to be a DAO, but you really need to, I think you need to really clarify what that is. Cause I mean, we don't really know what a DAO might look like, but to bring it back to two types of organizations that exist today that are sort of have different funding mechanisms. There's businesses, right, where they're basically about the bottom line. They're trying to achieve a profit. And then there's like non-for-profits where they actually, I've actually heard this quote from people who work in that world of nonprofits say that, well, the nice thing about a business is they have the discipline of the bottom line, and the nonprofits, their goals are less fixed to that. And then they also have an alternative funding source, right? They're not sustained based on profits. They're sustained based on funders. Now Status wants to become a DAO, which possibly is neither one of those. So we may want to think about, get clarity on that before we start to think about how a status becomes sustainable.
So it's unclear for me, where is there anywhere actually an income stream supposed to be for Status? What is Status supposed to be charging for that there can ever be an income stream for it? What have I missed? Why are we even talking about income stream? It's kind of like a new thing to me, to be honest. I mean,
I don't think we're talking about income stream per se. We're just talking about sustainability, and an income stream, like for a business, that's how a business can sustain itself. For nonprofits, it's not necessarily an income stream. It's a stream of donations over time. And so I guess that's why it kind of comes back to what is Status, what kind of what is it going to be, and what is the sustainability mechanism? It doesn't necessarily have to be an income stream.
So status is not a charity; it's actually a network, and we look like a charity because we are making this public good, but the actual thing is that we are a network, and this continuancy model probably will be reached by the network, or through the volunteer donation, or through some embedded fee in this network that it could be then directed to, for example, Open Bounty.
Okay, well, isn't it clear that there's always the possibility to sell tokens? Isn't that the continuance model in terms of financing? Is that the token has value and for people, and that's why there's a vesting schedule, because we anticipate that to be happening at a certain period of time. Or am I really naive to be thinking that?
I'm not thinking about this. I'm considering we don't have this. So I'm considering we will develop the network. And for example, we're going to have some payment system, and then we can charge a fee in this. And this fee could be used for the future.
So one way of thinking about this is like if you take something like United States, right, or any country. So you have a dollar and you have a government and you have an economy with business and so on. And you don't get rich by the government sort of printing money. That's not how a country gets rich, right? It's because of the activity, economic activity in there. And then the government they have some kind of tax system, which is this fee base to sort of provide certain essential public goods functions. But what actually creates the value in any sort of self-sustained economy is the business activity that goes on in it. And that's equivalent in terms of a network. And that's why I'm sort of very we can just sort of give out more S&T or whatever, because that's not actually solving the core problem. The core problem is making sustainable.
There's a limited amount of S&T. There's exactly. Contractually limited number of S&T.
Yeah, just like gold, that's fine. That's not a problem for a currency. That's even a feature to some extent. Right? Because if it is a utility token, the value increases as it provides more utility with network, at least so the theory goes.
Why wouldn't we be trading on and speculating on our own token? Why wouldn't Yeshin be doing that as part of our financing for continuance?
I think it's risky.
I mean, to me, like if you going back, you forget about money and currency and all these things. Like if there's a network and there's value in it, and then sort of there's people who participate in it, and they like it, just think of an economy. If you want something done, you sort of put up like a bounty for something, and then someone does it, and you get the service. You get private group chats or whatever, and then the people who benefit from that, they pay for it, and the people who can implement it, they get paid. And then sort of as the collection of all these sort of things that we provide for users, the network as a whole gets richer. It's more decentralized. It's more peer-to-peer, and I think it's not a good idea to think of it in terms of this sort of central S&T multisig and what can we do? Can we do things with, like trade, or can we print more money, whatever? I don't think that's the right starting point at all.
So that moves us right into the point that's in the wall of Shane, is that we have no incentive mechanism to host status nodes, where we could even start building that network. So what can we do to incentivize running status nodes?
I think that would be the payment of, for example, you have a mail server, and then you will earn tokens by providing this service. So you become a node because you have interest in providing the service. I think that's the main point we're going to.
Does anybody else have any comments on that?
I mean, other than it's something that we're actively working on. But
what are we actively doing?
Looking at incentive mechanics. Well, and even before we get to that, we're figuring out just how to make it easy to host one of these nodes. So progress on that is we've got DApp node up and running. So if you install DApp node right now, which in itself is frankly, it's a bit of a challenge. But you can get Status Node up and running at a click of a button if you can get to that point. Doing some kind of incentive mechanic to host a Status Node is, yeah, it's very much a non-trivial thing. But the guys who are looking at that is Adam and Dimitri from the Infura team.
Okay, so then let's move on from this point to the two-way dialogue from Kim and Akshi, and discuss that. How do you guys imagine that we can initiate this two-way dialogue? What do you actually envision, Kim? What would help? What communication medium or?
I think it probably, a lot of it is still being worked through, but I think a lot of it is going to go back to changing up our marketing model a little bit. We are working through what does an open source marketing plan look like. And so I think that will be much more community focused and community based, and much more around kind of going back to old school, more grassroots marketing techniques. But we will need a channel. We'll need a few things. We will need a channel to allow people to have input. So we do have a two-way dialogue outside of probably our normal social channels. And then I think we'll also need the ability to, as we engage with communities and we try and get these kinds of grassroots conversations happening, we'll need to be able to identify people within the community that can sort of become leaders in their own right within their community to kind of perpetuate the messaging. So like continuance from that perspective, where we're going to need to find community members that are not core contributors, but that believe in status, believe in Web3, whatever their motivation is, whether it's, the product or the ideology, that can kind of recruit, that's probably a horrible word to use, but recruit and get people on board that can then contribute and then continue kind of that, that cycle. I don't think we have a mechanism for that now. I think advocacy will be huge for enabling that. But I think in general, like from incubate, marketing, whatever, I think we don't have any kind of solution for that kind of two-way communication and that sort of empowering our community. I think that's what's missing. And I think from like Who Status is as a brand, I think part of empowering people is a part of that message. And I just feel like we're not currently necessarily doing that. As well.
So I was under the understanding that the ambassador program portal that Sean was having, the agency is working on with the agency to develop, that was part of our two-way dialogue with leaderboard and tasks and onboarding and things. Are you saying that that's not adequate, that we need something additional to that?
No, I think that will definitely be adequate. I think that, but I do think that maybe there's people that have already been onboarded that might be further along, or they might be existing users, or they might already be sort of more at the evangelist level than at an ambassador level, if that makes sense. And so I think it's finding those people as well. No, I think that what Sean is building out, and Sean and team, I think that that's absolutely the first step in the right direction. But I think it's sort of, how do we, like from an incubate perspective, how do we tap into the entrepreneurs and the startups that have been in the space for a while that maybe aren't going to go through the advocacy channel?
Can I ask you a question though? Can the tools be adapted that we're building to be useful for not only incubate but for studio, because you guys are both on ramps?
I think so. And Incubate is actually piloting the advocacy program, which is nice. So we do have some tasks that we're contributing with the goal of sort of pulling those projects out of the community and getting people to volunteer projects that might be perfect for Incubate, or ideas, or weighing in. So I think that that's absolutely a great start. And I think picking Incubate to be part of that pilot program was smart. So I think it's just kind of a learn as we go thing, but I don't think we're there yet. And I guess that's what I meant by two-way dialogue. It would be nice to be able to say, oh, okay, here's this open source marketing plan, and, let's just go and execute it. And I just don't think we have the tools necessarily. I think also, again, marketing focus, I think marketing, and I don't know if a lot of people actually understand or appreciate kind of our pain in this, is that marketing is very much tethered to old world tools. So we don't have the ability to work with marketing tools that are open source. So for example, channels to drive mass adoption, channels to reach people that we need to reach, they're very much centralized. So, in the marketing space, Twitter is still, king, and similar types.
This is free as of yesterday, by the way. I don't know if anybody caught that post that I put in the status channel, but Peepeth has gone to a free model. Let me bring somebody else into the conversation, Kim. Thank you for those excellent points. Actually, you're in a similar position with Studio. Do you I would assume that you agree with a lot of things that Kim have to say. Do you have something additional to bring into that in terms of combining the ambassador program and how do we use the models that we have? We've got ETH Prize, ETH Report, things like that. What do you think we're missing?
Well, this might be a bit tangential because it's less about the ambassador program and more about, creating content or updating content in a sustainable way for Studio. There, I think that the model to me there is quite clear, and it's laid out in a lot of detail in the Studio strategy doc, but it's essentially using the S&T token as a way to incentivize contributors to create content and then consumers to rate and rank that content. And initially that model will require some seeding, or let's say some funding through issuing a certain amount of S&T tokens for content contributors. But down the line, we can easily get that contribution of S&T tokens in terms of value to come from people like, groups that want to hire qualified devs that are using Status Studio. And this is not a model that is, it's laid out in great detail in the document in terms of exactly how the token would work and the token incentive model would work. We're using S&T as the token, but it's not anything revolutionary that I've come up with, in the sense that there are plenty of sustainable content contribution token-based models that exist out there in the education space, but also in parallel spaces like publishing, etc. So I guess I'm, from my point of view, why would we not do that and just use the S&T token to create those incentives? And so that's one. The second thing is, I think to Kim's point about just how do we get more people to contribute, I think one of the things I'm hearing, and I could be wrong, as a pain point is just getting more and more people to participate and know about sort of these programs that we are running for the two-way dialogue, right? So I think, I guess what I'm saying is I wonder if part of the issue is that we're not getting a two-way dialogue and dialogue back to us because not enough of a critical mass is even aware that these are happening. And then the third issue that, and I could be wrong about that second hypothesis, so I think Kim or someone in marketing would be best suited to know if that's the issue. But then the third one that I can guess at, just based on what I've seen so far at Status, is sometimes I feel like maybe our engagement is too fragmented across too many channels. So I guess I personally had some of this confusion too, in terms of saying, so while I think, for example, starting a technical Twitter channel is a fantastic idea and we absolutely need it, and it has sort of nothing to do with what I'm going to say next, but it's in addition to then the discuss thread, then it's in addition to Slack, and it's in addition to the Status chat. So I just personally, as a user at Status, just feel like there are so many different forums, and I wonder if we are fragmenting our audience for that two-way communication across so many channels that they don't even know where.
I think that's a little bit difference of a discussion than it is from Continuance. I'd like to bring Sonia into the conversation and talk about our centralized company structure without open governance. Where do we stand legally with how it is that we've presented ourselves? are we potentially shooting ourselves in the foot with continuance as a value with where we're at right now?
Well, this topic I have heard previously with blockchain projects that philosophy and ideology on one side, actually, that we want to follow all the principles and values. But then, everybody's actually, for the purposes of token sale, had to incorporate because it was impossible actually, and it would be illegal from the investor position that you are offering tokens without being incorporated. So this was some kind of starting position. As you know, Status has two companies, three. Mostly for the purposes of balancing and having legal framework for service agreement and for employment agreements. Also for any kind of contracting with other participants in the ecosystem, everyone have some kind of entities, so it's much easier to have like normal flow and documentation that it's covering up from any kind of risks or something similar. Of course, you're going in some kind of DAO direction.
I'd like to give you a second question on that. So I guess it's pretty clear that the reality of us having some sort of entity, the DAO, as an entity is not only far off, but might not ever happen. Jared has mentioned to me the concept of saying that Status's network, the DAO of Status, essentially ends up becoming a number of the sum total of all of the individual peer-to-peer contracts that it is that we do with each other. So that's his vision. So there is no actual entity, but the network has this concept of a DAO that is just the sum total of contracts. What do you think we're ever going to actually? Two questions. Are we going to actually establish literally a DAO? Do you think we should? Yeah.
I like the concept of DAO, definitely. But the thing is actually practicalities, because it's not about calling it DAO or, it's about that we are actually doing all the things that would actually represent it, and the voting systems and all the functionality for smart contracts. And this actually, it will create DAO itself. DAO will never be at least I don't see that it will happen in a decade. Maybe it will be recognized, because I see that some kind of structures of libertarians are evaluating ideas of creating some kind of systems that would be like country as DAO as itself. But this is far future for now. What we can do is implementation of all the values that DAO actually has, and then we call each other, and then actually the structure completely has to change, because you cannot be at the same time corporation, which practically has employees as such then, and that it's centralized from where actually the sources are coming, for contributions. Now it's completely functioning as a corporation.
Cool. So then that leads us on to the combination of 2 points that are in the Wall of Shame notes for this session. The reliance on core contributors and lack of other contributors, and then hiring people in an old employee model, which doesn't lend itself to working on replacing yourself kind of a mindset with no succession plan. I'd like to open up those 2 points into the round for further discussion. From somebody that hasn't talked yet would be nice. Who wants to raise their hand on that point? Danny?
It looks like from his username, he's just here to listen.
Okay, gotcha. JB or Carrie, how do you guys see that stuff?
I think to date, like, we've really been about pragmatism. So in lieu of, hundreds of community members working for us, we've had to go out and hire people in this kind of traditional model, partly because most of us, or many of us, came from traditional models. So that's like your default in lieu of progress, right, you default to what you know best. And I think for many people on the call, like what we know best is traditional hiring models, traditional interviews, and bringing people on board. And I think and I just feel like we're always going to default to that until we have a bigger vision. Not that I think, I don't think we're hiring any bad people, but we're stuck in this traditional model. But I also think if we could become like non-reliant on core contributors, that actually solves a lot of our problems. So the discussion around funding earlier, like people, I think are probably our biggest cost. And so if we didn't need full-time contributors, we wouldn't have to worry about income streams half as much. But I think it's just a pragmatism in our approach today.
Cool. So Barry and Graham, both of you guys, how do you see this developing? What is it that we're missing actually? And I don't want to talk about the advocacy program or from the marketing standpoint or communication standpoint. What are we missing in what we are today that is not bringing more contributors to us?
Well, I think one thing is just there's different types of contributors, but I'm thinking just in terms of
code base. Let's talk about contributing to the code base. I mean, we're a pretty hot project as far, in my opinion. Why aren't other people seeing us as hot and contributing? Is it just too hard, the code base, or is it too hard? Is our communications too fractured from your point of view as a developer?
I think, yeah, like the core status chat, it's really specialized, and maybe for the average developer just getting started requires quite an investment of time, and maybe even the average developer is not necessarily familiar with
That's true across the blockchain space though that we're in. Why is it unique for us? I mean, all of this stuff is really new.
I'm not sure that's necessarily true with other projects. I think you could build things that are just in more generic languages. Like there's definitely, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but there's definitely some like more obscure tooling and even languages used in things like status desktop that I think are just required more specialized knowledge than okay, we'll get a little deep in the weeds, but I'll try to keep it on the surface. I don't know, just like a plain vanilla JavaScript implementation of the status client. I think if that existed, you would see a lot of developers just hacking on it, just kind of building the features they want to see. And we might start to see more forks emerge of status clients. Like status desktop, I think it's like Closure Script with React Native with Qt. And there's like a bunch of specialized things that just require maybe a significant investment of time just to get started. And
so you're saying that we need a simpler level of abstraction? Isn't that the approach that Embark is taking?
I think Embark is a general tool for building dApps, and it's great. But
they're going up to a level of they're stepping up the level of abstraction. Do we need to do the same thing, simplifying things?
I think it would help. I think it's an experiment worth running to try to build maybe a second simple client and see if it brings in contributors.
I would push back a bit on it being technical difficulties. I think as an organization, a lot of it that I hear is sort of skepticism, and it's more cultural than anything. I am not convinced that majority of people think it's a valuable thing in its own to grow the network in terms of number of contributors. There are very few people on the development side who are actively focused on that. And the same thing with ideas around DAO and so on. I think a lot of it is just lack of, maybe lack of knowing how to, but also lack of will and curiosity in terms of playing around with this. That's my observation. To me, it's more culture than anything else, just like when we moved from Stack.
So then we're really failing with our statement. We create software incentivized to continue to exist and improve right now.
Yeah.
If we're honest with ourselves, right? There's no incentives apparently because we don't have contributors outside of the ones that are getting paid.
Well, we do have a couple. If you look at Gitcoin, there's one, we're actually doing it right now with the I mean, with what we're doing with storybooks and building out components, we're doing like a small test that we started on Friday, and we created a bounty for one of these UI components. And actually, just a few minutes ago, I saw an email from the contributor who says he's working on it, and we'll be opening up a pull request later today. But for that, again, we use something like
a couple of guys does not a network effect make, right? Yeah.
Well, to also step back, I'm just going to leave it with this question for you. Who do you think? Well, and contributors are different characters, right? They're people. There's developers, but there could be other type of people developing. But just speaking of developers, when you think of an external contributor and they're a developer, what do you think they are like in their life? They probably have another job, and this is something they might be doing in their spare time. So how much time do you think they can invest to do it? And, what kind of impact can they make in their spare time? Or, like what, who do you think they are? Or maybe they're not.
Well, I mean, they're the same people that are contributing to any other open source project. And there are people that just, instead of working two jobs, they work one for money and they contribute to an open source project. So, the question is, maybe we should ask ourselves, not further now in the conversation, because we need to wrap this up. What is it that we're doing wrong that people aren't contributing to us as much as they should? And the answers are twofold. Technical difficulty is what I've pulled out of this. Technical difficulty and fractured channels that people have a hard time starting. So we've got 8 minutes here till the end. And rather than continuing with any of these things, I'd like to give anybody a chance to pop up with something that we haven't covered.
I think that we should notice that there is not a lot of people using status right now. So this would, if we have a lot of users, let's say a company that wants to run the app, they might invest in status to develop something they need because of the users, basically. So the more users you have, the more incentive you have to actually develop status.
Just the last point on today's, on the last comment, Michael, is that's why extensions are really exciting, because extensions is a way to create native functionality inside of status without knowing any of the core code base, really. But that's something that's going to be really exciting when it launches and comes out. And then with regards to like kind of a positive sign to see, will be someday in the future where just like people built Ethereum wallets for Ethereum, we're going to see people building or taking in the status network into their apps to offer decentralized messaging. I think that's where we get to a point where it becomes really continuous.
Mm-hmm.
Just to take on that, to add to what people have said, I think there are like two things that can really help status go to the next level and help with continuance and all of these things. The first is mission. Like, what are we doing it all for? Like, there's so many companies in this space and so many tech companies in general. It'd be great if status stood out in terms of like a mission statement, kind of what Grassroots is doing now. That could really help distinguish us. And the second one is impact of the mission. And like a point was just raised that we don't really have any users. And so even if we had a refined mission, we wouldn't be able to have much impact. And I think that it's very positive if we are able to increase our footprint, both through marketing, but also through people using the app. Then our footprint grows and we can have a bigger impact in fulfilling our mission, as well as attracting interest, users, like whatever.
Cool.
So those two, mission and impact, would go a long way.
Can I add one quick thing to that? I agree 100%, Chad. And I just would probably leave my parting thought is I think it's twofold for Continuance. We need the developers, obviously, to attract coders to build the product, because the product will inspire users. But I think we also need to have a plan going forward for how to attract users, because right now, a lot of what we're doing is talking to ourselves. We're talking to core Ethereum members, people who are already within the community. And if our goal is truly mass adoption and attracting users, we need to start laying plans for that now, because that's a very different message. So there's like a twofold there, I think, for Continuance.
Cool. All right. So let's wrap it up. And let's see, in terms of time, what do we have here? So let's see you guys back here in 5 minutes. The next session will be shorter because we're going to use the last 20 minutes to work on the wall of shame proposal for Prague. So see you guys in 5 minutes.